Hello, bros. We're back with Shakespeare's Sweetheart by Sarah Hawks Sterling. Chapter 10. A Pretty Boy. A fortnight later, as I had planned, I joined a party at a nearby town and started out for London. My grandam had yielded to me in sheer despair. Soothly, I think she deemed my wits still wandering. Belike they were, after a fashion. Looking back, methinks 'twas the last remnant of my madness that made me so bold to devise so determined an execution. Many of the players had seen me before, and this made recognition possible. Therefore I stained my skin and dyed my close-cropped hair. The malattire was a difficulty, but my grandam measured me and took the items to a tailor in a town nearby. The suit he sent home fitted me ill, but served my purpose. Should any ask the cause of my absence in Stratford or in Shottery, my grandam was to say that I had gone to spend some time with a cousin in a distant town. She trusted, so she was to add, that change of air and scene would restore my bewildered senses. With what dire misgivings, with how foreboding a heart my grandam saw me begin that journey to London, I can only partly conjecture. It was in the early dawn that I left the cottage door, with never a glance backward at her standing with the babe in the doorway. I seemed to be possessed with but one thought, to go to London and to Will, and learn whether the tale I had heard was calumny or truth. Truth? Calumny or truth? I had no place in my mind for any other person or idea. That journey is not clear in my remembrance. It presented fewer difficulties than I had expected, for I was a country lass accustomed to rough roads and bluff companions. I was used to walking, yet could ride if occasion required. My purse was not deep, but it was by no means empty. I did not suffer hunger at any time, nor extreme fatigue, and I met many kindnesses along the way. I suppose I looked so boyish and so young that men and women both strove to treat me gently. Many a good housewife gave me a meal and scoffed at the idea of payment. Many a pretty girl looked softly upon me and offered me fruit or flowers with no recompense but a kiss. Burly men, thinking perhaps of a young son at home, befriended me. Also, while lads of my own apparent age adopted me as comrade. Altogether, my journey to London proved to me that the world was a less cruel place than I had deemed it on that autumn afternoon by the willows. There's the illustration of a flower that adorns each page, bruv. At last, one fair spring morn, we rode into London. I feel like this is blurry. Is it blurry? Is the lens clouded? Anyway, at last, one spring morn, we rode into London. As we entered the city, the mists and shadows that had obscured my brain seemed suddenly to clear away. It was as if, my goal attained, the thorny way that I had trodden was forgot. Near the haven of my desire, my stormy voyage thither dealt no longer in my remembrance. So perhaps after life's trials and sorrows, the blessed feel who rest within the gates of paradise. Soothly, like paradise indeed, looked to me those green gardens and fair mansions past which I rode that spring morning. The thought crossed my mind that Will would not have far to go to renew the remembrances of his country home. Here, as in Stratford on the outskirts of the city, were woods and winding streams. Here as there rose homes, quaint and stately, surrounded by beauteous gardens. Even after we entered London proper, we still saw many green lawns and budding flowers, and heard the birds singing joyously among the trees. At length, after one or two inquiries on my part, I safely reached the precinct of St. Helens, where I knew Will's lodgings lay. Instinctively, I sought the nearest inn, thinking to ask there more particularly as to his accustomed haunts. The place was dark and low-ceiled, and as I entered it, I blinked and saw little until my eyes became accustomed to the subdued light. When finally I was able to distinguish my surroundings, I gave a slight start. The room was empty save for one group around the table just across from me. In that cluster of faces, there were 4 out of the half-dozen that I knew. One of them my heart leapt to behold. Marlowe sat there with his handsome, dissipated face and wild, sparkling eyes. Burbage was gazing at the others with his accustomed meditative look. A scowl, as usual, spoiled Green's fair, boyish face. Talking eagerly, persuasively, Will stood back of Marlowe's chair, but his voice was too low for me to catch his words. The other 2 members of the group were strange to me. One, I was afterwards to learn, was Master Johnson. At that time, just beginning his career. He was short and rather stout, with a kindly, wise face that I learned later to love well. I have said that he was stout, yet he appeared not so that afternoon. His bulk faded into insignificance because placed beside a very mountain of flesh. His bulk faded into an insignificance because placed beside a very mountain of flesh. To his right, looking over the table, sat a fellow so fat that he filled the places of 3 ordinary men. At first sight, he was disgusting in his tremendous size, but there was a droll expression in his rubicund face which promised more value in his society than his general appearance indicated. My back was towards the light, and although they all gave me a quick glance as I entered, their gaze did not rest on me for any length of time. With an odd feeling between relief and disappointment at their lack of recognition, I found the place, still carefully keeping my back to the window, and ordered wine. The group around the table, having seen, apparently, but a slender country lad, continued their conversation freely. Will went on speaking rapidly for a few minutes, but I could not understand what he said. Then I heard Robin Green's high, petulant voice in reply. "Say what thou wilt, I'll not, and there's an end," he said, positively and disagreeably. Will became suddenly silent. He possessed the rare talent of knowing when words are useless. Marlowe grimaced at Green and gave an expressive shrug. Burbage looked troubled, and Johnson meditative. The fat man suddenly broke the silence. "Think again, Robin, sweet wag," he said, and the coaxing tones of his oily voice were almost irresistibly wheedling. "'Tis always well to oblige a friend. Will is thy friend. Therefore, thy idea of a friend is one who pays the tavern reckoning, as Will hath done today," observed Burbage somewhat dryly. The fat man looked at him with gentle reproach. "Well, so thou sayest," he said, having a great sigh that almost made the table shake. "Thou sayest it may be true. God forgive ye, lads. 'Tis your fault, if so it be. Before I knew the players, I knew nothing evil." He sighed again as they gave a derisive shout of laughter, but there was a twinkle in his eyes. "Why, thou old sinner," cried Marlowe, clapping him on the back, "'tis thou that leadest astray. If there be any scandal in London, who hath it at his tongue's end? Jack. There be a lady to serenade on a purse to steal, who is ready for either? Jack. Sooth, now I bethink me, thou didst escape heartily from that last adventure of thine upon the highway." He winked at the others. "Tell us about it, Jack." The fat man cleared his throat impressively, and a look of extreme gravity and importance came upon his face. The eyes of the rest grew merry, and they crowded as closely about him as his bulk permitted. "'Twas at Eastcheap one dark night, a month since," he began with unction. "Methought 'twas in Blackfriars a year ago," murmured Marlowe with mock interest. "Nay, thou art mistaken," replied the fat man, gravely. "'Twas as I have stated but now." "It boots not," said Will, with extreme politeness, his eyes bright with amusement. "Proceed, Sir John." "Sir John!" exclaimed the stout storyteller in a gratified tone. "Ah, Will, good friend, thou art the only one who so calls me, yet truly I deserve a title, for I have done valorous deeds in my time. Not the first is that I am about to tell thee of. It happened near the theatre across the river." "Nay, 'twas at Eastcheap," said Burbage, laughingly. Jack gazed at him reproachfully. Thou must have misunderstood me strangely, he said in a tone of mild correction. 'Twas in Blackfriars that it chanced. What? Interrupted Robin Green petulantly. That what chanced? This of which I am about to tell thee, answered Sir John imperturbably. Imperturbably. There was a laugh at Green's expense, and he subsided, frowning. The fat man paused to drink a measure of wine, then continued impressively. By a dozen was I beset that night, and for 2 hours together did I engage with them. 8 times was I thrust through the doublet, and 4 through the hose, my bucket cut through and through, my sword hacked like a handsaw. Sooth, no hero of Troy knew ever such a combat, observed Johnson, wiping his eyes, which were filled with tears of laughter. How didst thou live? Asked Marlowe with mock horror. Heroes are not as other men, said Will gravely. His eyes were very bright, and they were fixed on Sir John. Proceed, proceed. I continued the fat man, growing excited as he went on, and rising ponderously to act out his story. 16 at least set upon me that night. 16, said I. Nay, 50. Beshrew me if there were not 2 or 3, and 50 upon poor old Jack. 2 of them I peppered well. He drew his sword and flourished it in the air. Thus I bore my point. 4 rogues in buckram then let drive at me. 2, interjected Green quickly. 4, little Rob, returned Sir John, gazing at him in a paternal manner that immediately reduced Green to voiceless rage. All their 7 points I took in my target. Thus, he illustrated dramatically. 7, oh, Jack, Jack, cried Marlowe, with a roar of laughter. 7 by these hilts, replied Sir John in a solemn, offended tone. These 9 in buckram then began to give me ground, but 7 of the 11 I paid. Enough, cried Johnson, laughing heartily. Homer and Virgil are quite surpassed, and the tragic heroes of Rome and Greece are as naught beside thee and thy deeds, Sir John. Sir John bowed and smiled with a look of gratified vanity. Of none of them can it be said, cried Green, rudely striking the sword out of the fat man's hand with a deft turn of his own wrist. Of none of them can it be said that they fought 11 buckram men grown out of 2. As the page sticks. And sticks again. Oh my gosh. At the insulting words and action, the fat man's face became furious. By a dexterous movement, singular in one of his size, he recovered his sword, and with the flat of it began to belabor Green over the shoulders. Thou boy, thou cur, thou pig, he cried between the strokes, thou art beneath aught but chastisement, else would I demand the satisfaction of a gentleman, and I would prove to thee my swordsmanship. Thou— Peace, peace, interrupted Will, arresting Sir John's sword at imminent danger of its being turned upon himself, and motioning the fat man to his seat. Robin is but a lad, Sir John, forgive him. Robin, thou dost not well to doubt the knight's word. Come, landlord, another cup of sack. With some difficulty the storm was calmed. Sir John, breathing forth threatenings against Robin Green, at length subsided into his former place. His tormentor and victim, almost weeping with pain and rage, shook his boyish fist at the fat man. In impotent anger, Marlowe sat laughing derisively at them both, but Burbage's face remained grave. Johnson was pouring forth a flood of classical comparisons, in which the late undignified encounter was likened to some of the famous comments before Troy. Will's face wore an abstracted expression. Meseemed he looked older and graver than when I had seen him last. At length all became peaceful again. Sir John, having gulped down much liquor, presently nodded himself into a doze. Green sat in sulky silence. The rest became quiet when the fat man's inspiring jollity had sunk into slumber. The old villain, said Marlowe, gazing at him contemplatively. He's rare sport indeed, but what a liar! Thy mock title suitably delights him greatly. Will, 'tis said there's some strain of noble blood in him, which accounts for his pleasure when thou dost dub him knight. Why dost humour him so? Will smiled a little bit, but made no reply. Canst not conjecture, Marlowe, and there interposed Burbage quickly and kindly. Sir John will be in a play some day that will capture the town. Then the Queen's Majesty. Will interrupted him by a gesture of protest. Castles in Spain, he said lightly. Yet, methought somewhat sadly also, castles in Spain. Sooth such are they, like to remain, meseems just now. Robin, thou knowest my future welfare may hang on this performance. Will not act my Juliet? Nay, said Robin curtly and decisively, and turned his back upon the others. Thou saucy lad, began Johnson angrily. Thy reason, said Burbage, gazing at the boy sternly. He pouted and shrugged his shoulders, but made no other reply. He's the only player who will look the part, said Johnson mournfully. A fleeting glance of triumph swept over Green's face at the words. Burbage sighed and looked away from the rest in thought. As he did so, his eyes fell on me. His face brightened a little, and he touched Will's arm and whispered in his ear. Fully conscious of his movement, yet obliged to appear unseen, I sat in agony for a moment. Was I recognized in this place among this company? The strange feeling, half joy, half sorrow, tugged at my heart. The next instant I was calm again. At Burbage's whispered words, Will uttered an exclamation of relief. He rose and came towards me. The rest stared at him in amazement. Then, with one accord, followed, all except Green and Sir John. The group closed around the table where I sat. There was no recognition in their gaze. Even Will looked me in the eyes and knew me not. He spoke presently with the ready charm that was always his. Good morrow, lad. Hast come to London to seek thy fortune? By thy countenance and dress I judge that thou art not of the city. I nodded, my eyes searching his face half eagerly, half fearfully for any sign of recognition. I did not find it. Why, then, thy fortune's thine without seeking further, Will continued cheerily. We're players, lad. Wilt join us? Thy face and figure are rarely suited to a woman's part, and lads like thee are scarce in London town. Yon fellow, sulking at the table, hath been the only one, and he is spoiled through prosperity. Wilt be his rival? I looked at the different players, hesitating, dubious. I had not dreamed of this, yet in what better way could my mission be accomplished? Will thought my silence rose from boyish timidity and continued kindly, encouragingly. I have a play, an Italian play, and need a heroine for it. He looked at me critically again and murmured, It is my lady. Oh, it is my love. I had to hold myself rigid to prevent a visible shiver running through me. Alack, what bittersweet memories those words awakened. At that moment, Robin Green awoke to some inkling of what was going on. He rose from the table and joined the rest. Who is this? He said in this high-pitched voice, gazing at me superciliously. Thy rival, Robin, cried Marlowe with a great laugh as he clapped him on the shoulder. A mean, dangerous expression came into Green's eyes. He looked at me jealously, contemptuously, then darted a glance of hatred at Will. The last look decided me. I am at your service, sirs, I said, speaking in a voice higher than my natural one in order to disguise it more effectually. I will follow you, master, I said to Will, and thus, quickly, my mission was half performed. Johnson's face and Burbage's lighted generously. Marlowe gazed from Green's jealous countenance to mine with a look of malicious amusement. Will's face relaxed, and he smiled the rare and tender smile that I had once loved well. Then welcome, my Juliet, said he, and gave me his hand to seal the compact. Goodbye, bros. Goodbye. Goodbye.